Today I'd like to go back to what we were discussing last week, and I always have these videos called Are You With Me to try to get you interested in today's topic. And last week I already mentioned this lady, Erna Smith, and the fact that she said on TV seeing should not always be believing, right? Because they can make things up pretty easily. And so what I'd like to introduce today is something called, and I'm not sure how you say it because I heard it on Japanese TV, but I'm guessing Muller effect. And it's based on sounds, right? Because as you probably realize, I'm focusing mainly on images, but I do want you to realize they can also do some pretty interesting things with sounds, right? So just watch and see what you think. Basically, what this is called is the fact that what we see is usually stronger than what we hear, basically, right? That's the idea. Whatever our eyes catch, it will go kind of over what we hear. So when we see his mouth, we hear kind of a ta, ga, I'm not sure actually, because for me some of the sounds are not that clear. But the thing I know for sure is that I hear a different sound when I don't see his mouth, right? Then it's very clear for me it's a ba sound. So the guy somehow managed to do what we call it's a labial sound, like with the lips, the ba. He managed to learn to do it without using his lips, so that we can't be tricked, right? And thinking it's not a B sound, it has to be a ga or a ta, which is an open mouth sound. So to me, it's just another thing. We're like, but no, I saw it on TV. That's what it is. But actually, what we see can influence what we hear, transform what we hear. So for me, that's another. How can I say this? I don't want to say warning because it almost sounds dangerous, but just something to be aware of, right? That there is a lot of ways to change what we think is reality, right? So just be careful with that. Yeah, that's exactly what I just said. I'm not going to go. So last week, that's what I was explaining to you. So to be critical towards what we see on TV, especially, or nowadays, videos and all that, I talked about the fact you could use the script, right? So what people are actually saying. Then how does the story start and how does it finish? It matters because how it starts catches our attention, so we keep watching, and how it finishes is what we remember most, right? So that may influence what's in the middle. Next, who are the people interviewed? Right? Paying attention to this. Are they interviewing everybody involved in the event or only a specific population? And actually, it's a bit of I don't know if it's interesting, but strange coincidence. I'm reading right now the book by Murakami called Underground. And it's about the sarin gas attack in the subway in Tokyo. So that I know it was a long time ago, right? It was like 22 years ago, so most of you were not born. But what I find extremely interesting with the book is that he interviewed everybody that was touched by the gas attack. Some people actually didn't really suffer from the gas, but nonetheless, we're in the subway and saw the panic and tried to help others, and so even interviewed them, right? So I really admire his effort at including everybody who could give a perspective on what happened that day, except the people who were actually responsible for the gas attack. He could not talk to them. It was forbidden, right? So only the people who were suffering from the gas release. So very interesting. So it did make me think of our class. It does matter who you interview. And so the sound bites, the sound in the background. Do you hear people laughing, crying, sirens, gunshots, whatever, right? So the sound in the background. And obviously we are focusing on the visual, what you see. And today I'd like to talk about something that's actually a big part of French culture. If you go to Paris, you can have someone draw your face and in exaggerating or making some part of your face bigger. And it's, I was actually very surprised, extremely popular with tourists. I'm not sure I quite understand why, but it is. So just have to deal with it. So this is called a caricature, right? So you see the real guy, that's George Clooney on the left side, and then how people would caricature. So for instance, they use the fact that he has a rather, big, well, not big, but a very square chin. Here you go. And so this is what they made in the caricature. They made it bigger. And then I'm guessing the eyebrows also are a bit exaggerated. The fact he's got the more bushy eyebrows. But so that's what they do, right? They kind of look at your face and they're like, oh, interesting eyes. I'm going to focus on the eyes. Or interesting lips. I'm going to focus on the lips. And I believe she's coming up, right? So that one, I'm not sure. This is Bruce Willis, and I'm not sure he'd be very happy about it because it kind of makes his head look funny, right? So, depending on how you take it, if you're not too insecure, I guess you can find it fun. I'm not sure how we would take that one, actually. Another one is David Beckham. He almost looks like, I don't know, it's almost scary the way they made him, but I guess that's what they were seeing in him. Again, the chin and the eye part is pretty intense. And we do have a woman, yes, where Angelina Jolie usually is very much known for her lips and her cheekbones, so obviously the caricaturist focused on that. So, right, those are called caricature. I promise in Paris they're very nice, right? They make you, and it's in charcoal, so it's kind of cool. It looks, it's black and white, and it's a very different way of doing it. It's not a color thing like this. But so caricatures, and usually people consider caricatures fun, and that's what they should be. But sadly, they can also be hurtful depending on how you do it. And what I'd like to introduce to you today is actually to the point of getting dangerous, right? To the point of focusing on a part of a population and making them different or separate, or making them responsible for all the problems you may have on Earth. So they can also become dangerous. And the reason is, and that's why I have still the frame background for the slides. They frame people, so they define, they focus on people, and they focus on something that is usually challenging, which is what you look like, right? So they focus on your physical characteristics. And so I'll use an example from the past, and if you are in the intercultural communication class, I actually talked about it last week or something like this, but I'll go in more details. And one more contemporary. This one I used the movie, but for a different reason. This time I'll show you part of the movie that is focusing on caricatures. So, just to remind you, right, this is where we're at for the semester. Last week we did critical thinking towards TV news. This week we are doing it towards propaganda, and actually towards religion. I'll ask you to do it at home. It's a short video I made of a couple of images that have been changed because of religious pressure, right? So it's not so long. So I'll ask you to do this at home, then we can discuss it. So I'm not talking all the time otherwise. So the example from the past, as probably you saw coming if you know what's happened during World War II, it's the Nazi propaganda. So during World War II, if you don't know, the German government decided to focus on the Jewish population to find reasons for the bad economy, for actually starting the war, for keeping the war going, for everything that was going wrong, basically, in Germany. Obviously, this is not true, but that's what the Nazi did to Jewish people. And so to give you a couple examples, I translated what is written in German. And basically, as you see, you have the Jew with the Star of David right on the hat. That's how you can identify usually Jewish people. It's like for Christian when you wear a cross around your neck. That's their symbol. And then basically what it says, it's one eats the other, right? So you have, if we go from down below, you have here it's the US with the Uncle Sam, emblem. This is usually connected to England, and you can see the British flag there. So the US eats England, it's more powerful than England, and then China eats the US because it's more powerful than the US, I guess. But then in the end, who eats everybody else? It's the Jew, right? So basically, what the German wanted the government wanted to do, because there's a big difference there, is to make the Jews look bad. And as you'll see, there are a lot of them, and you'll see it also in the movie clip, actually. So again, behind the enemy powers, so yes, Germany was fighting England, the US, and Russia, right? So behind the enemy powers is the Jew. So again, making them look guilty. And the obsession for the propaganda, I'm not exactly sure why they were so obsessed with this, but definitely they used it over and over and over again. It's the nose, right? So they were focusing on this, making it bigger, making it even more bent than they tend to be if you do belong to the Jewish community. So it's always that way, right? Because this one, and the Star of David, obviously, but that one is just a religious symbol. But the caricature part is here, right, in the nose. I'll show you a couple more examples. So here you have he's guilty of the war, which is not true. It's Hitler who decided to invade Poland and started the whole thing, but anyway. The Jew starts war and makes the war longer. Again, you see the nose. And this one a bit more explicit and even in a way scarier because it is in English for this one. Who's the Jew? The nose knows. Right? So you can tell by the nose who is Jewish or not. And that one is definitely the one that I find the scariest. It's called the eternal Jew. So as a way to say the eternal problem. Because the German government wanted people to believe that as long as we have Jews, we will have a problem. So that's why they decided to kill all of them. Right? They thought that was it. If we don't have them, we won't have any problems. Which, as you probably can guess, that's not the case, right? So making them look scary. Oh, also another thing, but that was not related to caricature. They eat children. That was another one. So usually they use that scary face when they wanted to emphasize this with children, right? So run away from Jewish people. They eat children. Whatever, right? So, so this obviously. Oh, sorry, I do have more. I thought I had limited those. So again, the eternal Jew, that you keep seeing this, right? And you can see the nose again. And this one is actually even scarier because it wasn't just images, but this is a documentary about how bad the Jews are. So they really pushed it super far. Actually, a lot of people who study political propaganda, they usually study what happened during World War II because the Nazis were very, very good at it. It's sad to say, but they mastered the thing, right? They're really, really good at it. So they just use it in a very bad way. And the one that really, really bothers me is this one, because they were actually teaching German children at school to identify Jewish people. So this is just a drawing showing what was happening in the classroom, and teaching them how to identify them so that they could tell the SS or the police force that there is a Jew there, you need to arrest him. So they went very, very far, right? The control they had over the whole country was pretty scary. And so to summarize, the Nazi propaganda used pictures to frame Jews as evil, right? They are the bad people, we need to get rid of them. And the way they did this is the caricature of Jewish people through the nose, right? So they decided that whoever had, it's more the roundness. In the caricature, they just make it bigger, right? But the roundness here, instead of having a straight nose, to have it more round here, was a sign of being Jewish, which is hilarious because it doesn't, how can I say this? It's, you can have a round nose in any type of culture, religion, or whatever, right? But they had decided this is it. And to me, that's the thing that we're very much missing. There has been very, very little studies about how did the German people reacted to all this, right? We know what they saw, but we don't really know how they reacted to it. So this is something I can't explain. I wish I could, but there's one book in German that seems to talk about it, so maybe next summer when I have time I will read it, because it takes me a long time to read in German by now. But I really don't know, right? So I can't tell you this. So I'm not going to try to invent or guess. So the question is, were they critical or not when they saw this? Or were they just too scared to be critical? And then my other question, so that's why I want to read that book, then did they just get used to seeing it, right? It was just become, the usual thing, and so didn't pay attention to it, which is also a bad thing, right? So I really don't know, but those are my questions, right, connected to these pictures. So if we bring it now to the present, sadly, as you probably know, and I'll ask you actually if we do have time today, we may have time, what also happened during the war between the US and Japan. So the American propaganda against Japan, right? Because if you do this on Google image, you might find some interesting things. So just see if you can find how the Americans were caricaturing the Japanese, right? It might be interesting, and vice versa, the other way around. How did the Japanese government caricature the Americans, right? You might be a bit surprised about that one. But nowadays, we still have the issue, and you know that it's been also more focused on religion rather than, an ethnic group, a specific ethnic group. And yes, I am thinking about what happened in France, but it also happened in Denmark. As soon as people start making drawings about Allah, it becomes a big deal, right? So people react badly to it. But here I don't want to go there because I'm not sure I can be very productive with this and just be emotional about it. But there is one that I think I can be more, not positive, but just a bit calmer about. And it is the physical, right? So if we keep focusing on what people look like. And so I'm going to ask you, before I go on, because I know I've been talking a lot, who do you think this drawing represents? Right? So go ahead and talk to the people around you. Guesses? who do you think this drawing represents? So usually it's in American culture, there is that stereotype that African Americans have big lips, right? It's kind of something they tend to focus on and always bring forward whenever there is a conflict or they're trying to make fun of one another. And so it is the caricature, a bad drawing of a African American student in the classroom I'm going to introduce now. So the classroom, I know it's the movie, but I want to make it very clear that it is a true story. They just made a movie out of a true story. If we could, I would love for everybody to read the book because the book is even better, but I know movies are easier to get you interested, so I usually try to use the movie. So yes, it is a movie, but it is a true story, right? And especially this drawing actually is the one from the book, not the one you're going to see in the movie, right? So it's the drawing from the movie. So I'll show you what was happening in that classroom. Oh, so sorry, Mrs. G, so Mrs. Gruel, she is trying to teach a bunch of students in high school who are from different minority groups, many minority groups, and they hate one another. So it's very, 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 very complicated to teach them. And basically, this is kind of like the turning point. When this happens in class, she kind of blows it and decides we need to be working on more important things than me teaching you just English. Right? So that's kind of like the turning point in the movie for her. So let me show you what was actually very shocking is that, as you can imagine, the students kind of, at first they're giggly and they're like, yeah, arguing, but then they realize this is something a bit bigger than what they expected at first. So she gets their attention and then she asks the question, do you know what the Holocaust is? With the capital H, the big one. And when she asks them this, only one of them actually knows what it was. And on the other hand, when she asks who has been shot at, so who has had a gun pointed at him or her and someone actually fired, all of them raise their hands except one. Right? So I think this is what shocked her the most. And when you read the book she wrote afterwards about her whole experience, she realized that these kids had no understanding of what had been happening in the past, so they couldn't understand what was happening to them. So that's why she decided to go back into the past to try to show them that what they are doing to each other right now has been done in the past and it didn't solve the problems. That hurting one another was not the solution, right? So that was kind of like for her the moment where she went, whoa, what am I supposed to do with this? And this is, for me, how you fight propaganda. The way she did it is that she decided to make the Holocaust a story with a face, not just numbers, not just horrible German people, but actually focusing on the people who were suffering from the situation, right? And obviously not going into the caricature aspect. And so one way of doing this, and I'm sorry because the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles, in California, doesn't have the exhibit anymore. It's been replaced by one on sexual. How do they call this? It's more about people who don't fall into the straight category. So it's a very beautiful exhibit about being tolerant towards people who are not like most people. Right, and I'm doing the hair quotation thing here. So she takes them to the Museum of Tolerance because at the museum, that's what they did. They focused on the people who died during the Holocaust, not about how bad the Germans were, how could they do this, how perfectly organized it was. No, they wanted to focus on the people who suffered from it. So I'll show you that scene in the museum, yeah? As I was saying, the Museum of Tolerance, the special exhibit is called The Children of the Holocaust. And the idea was that they would, on purpose, frame the children. They were focusing mainly, you had a couple adults here and there, but they were focusing on children. Because they knew people would realize how ridiculous this is if they were focusing on the kids. So it was done on purpose, right? They knew the child impact, right? That was done. So the frame they were using were the children. The reason was not just understand how many people died during the Holocaust, but who they were, right? So as you saw, they got a little card at the beginning, you go through the exhibit, and then at the end you put it in the machine and they print out what happened, right, in the end. Some of them survived, it's not just dead people. Some of them did survive, but at least they realized it's just not a number, right? There is a story behind that person. It's not just a darn number. And yeah, so that's what I was saying, right? More important, who they were. So in this case, I think being critical, right? Last week it was a bit more, how can I say this? Analyzing, right? What do you see? What do you hear? How does it start? How does it finish? These type of things, being very analytical. Honestly, regarding propaganda, when, a government or a company or a group of people is trying to push ideas that deep inside you feel are not right, the really only way you can answer this is by being human, right? The whole idea is, okay, I understand, okay, maybe these people are bad, but in the end they're still human beings, right? So isn't there a better way to look at them, to understand what's happening? And personally, I think that's when you find the best answers. Right now I'm thinking about what's happening in the Philippines. I understand that the government and even probably the people are fed up with the drug dealers and all of that. I can totally understand this. But going about and just shooting everybody, I'm not sure it's the best solution to the issue. Right? Being strict, removing corruption, arresting them, judging them, sending them to jail, cutting their power, I can see this being more effective than just going around and shooting everybody, right? So, because for me, again, they're just human beings. There is a reason why they are that way, whether they're selling drugs or they're using drugs. So, just something a bit even more contemporary, right, happening now. So that's my thing, right? It's just remembering we're human beings. People are doing things not just to annoy others, but actually just because they're humans. And I got a couple, I'm lucky because last year I went to a conference in California. It was actually a conference about reading. But a lot of teachers in America use reading as a way to teach content. And so this specific presentation was about the exhibit. And I was lucky because the lady had all these personal histories, right, about those kids who were sent to concentration camp. And for many of them, for many of them died. And what was very impressive also for me is how, like, the different countries they were coming from, right? It wasn't just France next to Germany or Poland next to Germany. It was like all the way out, to Hungary. This little girl was from Hungary and was sent to a concentration camp and machine gunned down, right? So they killed them, not gassed them, but actually shot them. And then this one is from Poland, and also after the cleansing, I hate using that word, when they emptied the ghetto they had created for Jewish people in Poland, this little girl tried to escape and also got shot at that point. She was 19, so she wasn't actually killed in a concentration camp, but killed trying to escape. Not just the girls. This young man was from Denmark, and he actually he was actually helping out to help the Jews who were being sent to concentration camp, and he didn't die. Okay, he survived. He actually helped. If you read the bottom of the page, he helped transport 1,400 refugees. Sweden was a neutral country during the war, so it was a country like Switzerland. They never took part in the war, and somehow the Germans were okay with that and didn't invade them. So if you were in Denmark, the easiest way to get out, if you were Jewish, was to go to Sweden, because there that was safe. And so this is what this young man did, and he managed to help a lot of people, right, get there. So as I said, it's not just sad stuff. They're also sharing the power of people taking action. And yes, let's not forget Franco in Italy was on the side of Hitler. So to make Hitler happy, he also sent the Jews from Italy into concentration camp. Right? It was a very massive organization throughout Europe to get rid of the Jews. So from Bologna, he was actually not in a concentration camp. For him, he was actually helping the people who were fighting the Jews, and he got shot when he was helping out. He was very small. Yeah, he was only 13, something like that. Yeah, 13 when he got shot by the German army. So for me, that's the idea, right? If you have to fight against stereotypes, caricatures, the best way to do it is not to start screaming, usually because people don't listen anyway, but trying to find those faces, right? Trying to show that these are just people, right? They're not some sort of, monsters. They're just really people trying to fight for their rights and suffering for it. So that's my idea, right? So to fight propaganda, to be critical when you're faced with propaganda, trying to give a story a face. And it's interesting because it's like trickles down to other ethnic cleansing. So what that means is when you try to get rid of one part of the population, right? You think they're annoying, so you just kind of try to get rid of them. And this is Sarajevo, and this little girl back then, her name is Lata Vilipovic, now she's my sister's age, which is in her 30s, is connected also to the freedom riders, the people I showed you in the movie. And she actually became famous at the age of 11 because she wrote a diary during the war in Bosnia. So she was in Sarajevo, the capital city, and she witnessed the war between the two sides, which was a religious a religious separation. And she wrote a diary, and the diary became part of a BBC segment. And this is when people started realizing what was happening. Because I remember the war. I was a teenager when that was happening. And all we saw on TV were how many people died on that day. But thanks to her diary about what the war was like, we realized, crap, we have another Holocaust happening in Europe right now, right? So this is when people started reacting to try to make things end sooner than later, because we know where that went the first time, and people were trying to avoid the thing happening a second time. It didn't quite work quickly enough, but so the power of personal stories through her story, by making the war in Sarajevo not just a number thing, but understanding it from the perspective of an 11-year-old girl, people started reacting, right? It became something they could understand. So giving a story a face or sharing personal stories is what I'm trying to tell you regarding propaganda, right? To be critical. This is her, Zlata's diary. If you are interested in reading her diary, it's extremely well written and easy because she was only 11 years old. So usually non-native speakers can read it very easily. It really helps you understand really how stupid war is, right? And who suffers the most actually from it. And so Zlata got to meet the freedom riders. So those are the real freedom riders, right? Not the one from the movie, obviously. So they got to meet and talk about it because, again, it was, separating people into, whether you're Muslim or not, and the fight that it created and how it changed her life. So Miss G managed to invite her, and then she could come to the US and meet with the freedom riders. And Zlata actually is known as the modern Anne Frank. And Anne Frank was a girl during World War II who also wrote a diary while she was hiding from the SS in Holland. And sadly, Anne Frank got captured and she did die in a concentration camp. So Zlata is usually compared to Anne Frank, but obviously much luckier because she could get out of the country and be saved, basically. And this is what she wrote in her book. Actually, this one, I'm not sure, is it in the book or is it in the preface of the Freedom Riders? Hang on. No, it is in her diary. It is in her diary. So this is what she wrote. I have also understood the power of the individual experience in war. Right? Because usually when we talk about war and think about what we hear now about Syria, it's all about numbers. We never hear about who these people were, right? So I have also understood the power of the individual experience in war. When we hear of wars, we hear the number of dead and wounded. So when you got hurt. Of dates of battles, attacks, names of places that no longer exist. We become numb, so you don't react anymore, right? By the onslaught of cold facts. So you get so many facts about, not people really, just information. And we forget that every event touched individuals, ordinary people, children, young people, grown-ups, grandparents, one by one. If we listen to each and every story, we can get some sense of what the extent of war really is. All right. So again, going back to what I was saying earlier, make it personal. Show what is happening to specific people. Let's not just focus on dates and numbers and places, but actually who are these people who are suffering from whatever is happening, be it a war or just simple, not really, or discrimination, right? So trying to give the story a face, that's really my message for today. And there is an interesting quote for me when she says we can get some sense of what the extent of the war really is, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier, being critical is being human, being personal. And another issue that might also kick in is that big numbers are actually hard to understand in terms of human suffering. Right? Numbers don't talk to me at all, as some of you know from other classes. Numbers don't, it's not something I can imagine easily. But this quote for me says it all, and it says, the death of one man is a tragedy. Right? So that's how I actually feel. If there's only one person and I hear about that person, I understand the story behind that person, yes, it makes me profoundly sad. It is a tragedy. But the death of a million is a statistics. And seriously, that's how it becomes. It just becomes a number to me. It's not something I can relate to, I can feel for. So definitely thinking, make it personal, Remember, we're human beings. Oh, and by the way, the quote has nobody can really say who said it. So usually it's attributed to Stalin, if you want to do it the Russian way. The guy in Russia that got also completely crazy after World War II. But actually, it's more realistic that it was said by a French diplomat during war talks in between 1939 and 1945. So when they were talking about the war, it seems that it's more this guy who may have said it. In any case, for me, this way of putting it is very clear. If it's one person, yes, it's a tragedy. You increase the number, I don't get it. It just becomes a number. I can't relate to it.